Third stair. The paint on the stair rail had 4 coats, none of them chosen with any care. You could peel a thin stripe back if your thumb found the edge. Reva had stopped doing that. The manager had caught her once and made a face, not angry, just weary, like someone watching a person pick at a scab they didn't even know they had. The rail was shaky and warm in summer and cold enough to sting when the heat went wrong. Everything in the building was like that. Temperamental, the manager called it when she wanted to make people laugh. The yellow notice hung beside the mail slots, with the metal stuck to your fingers if you were in a hurry and licked them. Skip the third stair. No reason, just the line and the manager's initials in a strong hand with a loop on the first letter like a knot. People joked for a day or 2. Tenants made an exaggerated stride over it on their way to the landing, chuckling at their own show, then went back to the usual climb. The third stair was not broken. It sat a half-shade darker than its neighbors. Wood grain worn smooth, as if stepped on for longer than the rest had existed. You could stand on it and feel nothing, until you did. When someone forgot, they came back down pale and jangling keys as if the key ring had grown heavier while they were gone. They said nothing about what they had done. Later, those who lived along that stretch of hall would hear a lock rattle again and again, tested the way you test a door when your hand isn't sure what to trust. Then there would be a soft door sound where no door had ever been. The building had a shape that suited people who didn't want to be found. The front had brick that peeled and a canopy that leaned. The back opened into an alley that smelled like damp cardboard. The stairwell was the spine. It ran down the middle and kept people moving up or down without asking their reasons. The manager, a woman named Mrs. Lark, lived on the ground floor in a unit just behind the mail slots and pretended not to watch the stairs. You could hear her radio when you checked your box, the gentle cadence of a voice telling you what the weather thought it might do if given the chance. Reva lived on the landing above the laundry room, near the window that stuck in summer and banged in wind. She worked nights at a grocery that still had hand scanners that beeped like small birds. And in winter, she wore fingerless gloves a kid from the youth center knitted and sold in the doorway for a donation. Her unit smelled like detergent and onions more than it smelled like her. In the evenings, she turned on a small lamp that had lived in her family long enough to forget where it started. The shade gave off a soft gold that made the walls look kind even when they were only tired. The day she moved in, she counted as she climbed, not out of superstition, but because the load in her arms made it necessary. She had the lamp, a box of plates wrapped in shirts, a cracked mirror that had belonged to her grandmother and made anyone look a little taller. She counted and did not skip the third stair because she had not yet learned the notice. Later, once the lamp sat on the crate she would use for a table until she could afford better, she walked back down for the next load and saw the paper by the mail. Skip the third stair. Someone had drawn a small arrow toward it in pencil, as if anyone might miss the meaning. She smiled to herself and thought about whoever wrote it and the way some people needed rules to feel the world hold steady under them. Then she stepped around the dark stair on her way back up and forgot she had judged anyone for their need. A week turned into more. Work and sleep and the soft hum of her phone alarm at the hour when the town began to tip toward quiet. At the store, she stood behind a register that had a slight hitch in its belt, pulling at sleeves that had begun to pill. She learned which customers wanted to talk and which wanted their hand barely brushed by hers on the bag handle. On the way home, she stopped by the corner stand for coffee that came from a carafe with a crack near the handle. The kid working nights called her by name like they were cousins who had agreed not to ask too much. The building and its habits became her habits. She counted without counting and stepped wide over the third stair. On windy nights, the stairwell made a throat sound, a hollow note that rose and fell with the gusts. The radiator in the hall hissed and spit cold water from the stem when it was too tired to make heat. People's radios bled through the walls and made a thin layer of talk in the air. There was a comfort to it, like standing outside a diner and hearing cutlery without having to go in. Some tenants joked more than they should have. A guy down the hall with a big laugh and a strong jaw told anyone who would listen that the notice was a prank, a way to see who was gullible. He liked to stomp hard on the third stair and then throw his weight against the rail to make it complain. A woman on the top landing said it had always been there, even before she moved in, which didn't make sense because Mrs. Lark changed the paper whenever the tape gave out. Lynn, who lived across from the laundry, said it was the town all over. Rules with no reasons and everyone nodding like they knew. Reva didn't think about it much until after a long shift in winter, when the store had gone bright and hectic because of the storm warning on the radio. People came through with carts, piled up because they did not want to be caught short, even though the power lines had held through worse. The scanner beeped steady, and she let her hands find a rhythm. She could forget her body that way. By the time she got home, her shoulders sat higher than made sense. She climbed out of habit and miscounted on the turn. Her foot found the third stair. At first, she felt nothing but the familiar wood under her shoe. Then a sensation slid over her skin, like a cold cloth. She had a thought that did not belong to her about being on her way to somewhere she had been already. The air passed across her mouth like bread had just been broken in a room nearby. Her key ring shifted in her hand, and her fingers found a key she did not own. She took another step, not up and not down, forward. The landing ahead had a door with a narrow window of rippled glass and a doormat she recognized as hers, even though she had never owned one. She put the unfamiliar key into the lock because that felt like the only thing to do. The key slid with the smoothness of practice. The door was not hers. The door was hers. Inside there was a coat on the hook with the sleeve turned the way she turned it when she was in a hurry. There was a lamp warming a corner, the shade making a soft cone. There was a mug with a chip at the lip on the counter, set upside down to dry. And from the kitchen, her own voice. Not just the sound of it, her timing. The way she paused before she said things she did not mean, laughing at something she hadn't said yet. Her body made the decision to leave before her mind understood what to call any of it. She backed out, dragged the door shut, and stood with her back to the hall wall, heart thudding, key biting her palm. The stairwell breathed once, a sound like a shift in a sleeping house, and then the ordinary hallway returned. A neighbor passed with a bag of laundry and said, "Excuse me," like people say when they mean this will only take a second. Reva stood there until her heart settled and the line of her mouth loosened. She climbed the remaining stairs one by one, stepping wide over the darker tread like the floor might open, then shut herself in her own place and leaned her forehead against the cool metal of the door. By morning, the yellow notice was gone. A white square of less dirty paint marked the place where it had been, and the third stair wore its dust like a garment that fit. No one mentioned it at the mailboxes. People fumbled with their keys and pinched their letters out by the corner and pretended the world lasted just as long as the envelope they held. Reva told herself she had dreamed it. Long shift, not enough food, a small winter fever. She cleaned the mug with the chip and set it upside down to dry, as if to prove her life was a precise set of motions and not an arrangement of moods. When she left for work, she skipped the third stair with the steps so wide it made her laugh in spite of herself. Work had its own weather. The store song looped and the floor squeaked where a pallet had dented it long ago. A woman asked for a discount by way of a story about her sick cousin. A man bought a dozen cans of soup that all tasted like salt and said nothing. In the break room, the compressor under the soda machine kicked on and made the kind of effortful hum a person hears when they pay attention to a struggling motor. She drank burnt coffee and let it sit. That night, The wind pushed a plastic bag against the building like a hand. The bag fluttered and flapped, and then stayed, plastered there. The hall light buzzed. Reva climbed and counted softly, the way you hum when a song will not leave you alone. 1, 2. She reached over the darker tread and touched the rail. It vibrated a little. On the landing above hers, someone's radio played a song she hadn't heard since a year she had tried to be a different person. The smell of frying onions drifted from Lynn's place. Small, ordinary things stacked up and made a wall she could lean on. She unlocked her door and let the room take her. The next day, she noticed the third stair had grained itself smoother. She made herself stop looking. She took out her trash and listened to the bag scuff along the hall and down the steps, the air moving a degree cooler as she passed the dark tread. In the laundry room, the motor thumped against its bolts in its usual way. A poster on the corkboard announced a community meeting about building safety with a line about older structures. The ink had smudged. Someone had written maybe next season in the margin. She went back upstairs with damp detergent smell in her coat. In the afternoon, a notice appeared in the hall near the door. Increased foot traffic advisories downtown recommended limit on evening trips. Stay aware. The manager had printed it from a county site and stuck it with blue tape that left residue behind. People pretended such notices were aimed at someone else. Reva read it and then took the stairs down for milk because she had run out. On her way back, she looked at the third stair without looking, the way people look at a person pretending to sleep. Night came early, and the building seemed glad of it. Days shaped into a narrow kind of season. The radiator hissed. The elevator 2 buildings overgroaned loud enough to pass through the thin winter air as if sound-believed walls were opinion. At the store, the beeps of the registers shifted into a rhythm she could predict. A manager asked her to stay late because someone had called in sick. She stayed. She always stayed when asked. There was not much to go home to, and she did not like to be told she wasn't the sort who showed up. One night, she went out with Lynn to the bar on the corner. The chairs were high and the floor sticky, and the music too confident about itself. They sat near the end, so they could make the hand motion for another without getting into any long conversation. Lynn talked about childhood like a person talking about an old appliance, nostalgic for the way it used to work, careful to mention the parts that broke and which screws never quite lined up. Reva listened. Sometimes her attention slid to the door, the hinge squeak that sounded like a toy that had not been used in years. She thought about the coat on the hook in the other place. The sleeve turned, ready to be shrugged into. "Do you hear it?" Lynn asked. "Hear what?" "The laugh," Lynn said. "Through the wall by the landing. Last few nights. Like someone remembered a joke from when they were a kid." She put her finger to her ear. Thin little laughs, soft, like the wall is getting the joke now late. "Heat pipes," Reva said. "They fuss, or settling." Lynn nodded without believing. "It's lined up with feet on the stairs. That's the odd part." Step, then a little laugh, then step. Reva pictured the invisible figure on the stair, careful and sure, climbing from a floor that did not exist to a door that did. She felt her shoulders rise. She drank the last of her drink and wiped a damp ring on the table with her finger. "Anyway," Lynn said, and talked about her sister in another town, and the way they could not talk without hearing their mother in each other's voices. Reva nodded and took what the story offered. When they walked home, the streetlights hummed and moths burned their wings on glass. At the mailboxes, there was no yellow paper. Mrs. Lark had tacked up a flyer about a yard sale for someone's kid, the address written in a hand that tried to be stronger than it felt. Reva slid her envelope from the slot and felt it stick a little where the edge had crimped. She smelled dust and the sweet glue of old paint. She set one foot on the first stair and felt the whole building take a breath. She counted out of habit. 1, 2. She stepped wide. The third stair waited darkly, wooden and unremarkable, the way a flat sea keeps secrets you don't have the shoes for. Beyond that point, the air felt a degree cooler. The hall light blinked without meaning. She went in. Sleep did not come kindly. She lay with her eyes open and listened to a sound like a lock being tested somewhere it shouldn't be. The radiator coughed. A neighbor coughed. A car rolled by so slow she could make out the rattle in its wheel. When she drifted off, she caught herself just then, the way a person on a train wakes to the small lurch of a tunnel opening, a change in air. She dreamed she was late for work, but the store had become a long stairwell with walls of shelves. She could hear her name being called. She could not tell from which floor. On a mild day that felt like a lie, a county inspector came through with a clipboard and a polite face. He went from unit to unit, pointing at vents and tapping at window frames with a finger that had a band of grime no soap could remove. He said words like provisional and mitigated and wrote down long numbers. He told Mrs. Lark to post a new notice about a temporary limit on nighttime visitors and a request for tenants to report any anomalies in common areas. He used the word anomalies like it might be a kind of insect. When he came to the stairwell, he lifted his foot toward the third stair and then pulled it back without stepping, as if some small polite part of him had listened to the walls. After he left, the tenants gathered near the mail slots and used words like him without names. A man with a tired tie said the inspector looked like a boy dressed as a grown man. A woman said the boy had said the right words. The notice went up on the wall. Please avoid loitering in the hall after dark. Report any unusual noises. A line about safety in older buildings. Thank you for your cooperation. The blue tape ate a little more paint. That afternoon, as Reva came up from the laundry with a warm shirt on her arm, she saw the kid from the corner stand on the landing. He was new to the building, staying with a cousin while he found something else. He had a skateboard under his arm and a bruise on his leg the size of a fist. He looked down the stairwell like he wanted to drop the board and ride. He noticed her and nodded. You ever skip that step? He asked. Why? Just asking, he said. I did. First night. Didn't know there was a rule. What happened? Felt like missing a word, he said. You know when you read and your eye goes to the wrong line and you pick up a sentence that doesn't belong. Like that, but in my foot. I put it back where it goes now. He lifted his chin toward the third stair. It's just wood, though. Just wood, she said. He knocked on the rail, then grinned and swung the board around to catch the light on the scratched edge. He went up, stepping wide. He had not seen the other door. He had not heard his voice float from a kitchen that did not exist on the plan in the manager's office drawer. Reva began thinking about her breath in the stairwell. She had not done that before. The air had a taste of old paint and damp metal. On days after rain, the smell of wet wool lifted from the carpet runner. Sometimes a draft came up from the entrance and pressed a small palm against her cheek as she climbed. When she rounded the landing, the wall there always felt warmer, like a person had just brushed past. She put her hand to it once and could not tell whether heat came from it or went into it. She started to take longer to leave for work. She found herself putting her ear to her door as if she could hear the stairwell before she saw it. Once she opened the door and started out and then went back for a scarf she did not need just to allow the building a moment to arrange itself. This embarrassed her when she noticed. She laughed at herself in the mirror, and the sound felt borrowed. A man moved into the unit on the landing above hers, a single father with a girl who wore her backpack like armor. The girl counted aloud as she went down, not the stairs, but her own list of reasons to keep a promise she had made that morning. Reva wanted to ask what the promise was, and to whom it had been given, but the kind of person she was did not ask children their business. The father avoided eye contact until he didn't, and then he said hello in a voice that had forgotten how to pitch itself. At night, she heard him test the lock and then test it again. One night, she heard a door close that shouldn't have been there. The soft click of a latch catching on a strike plate in a place that was only a wall. She tried to tell herself stories that made it all less. She had a line she used at work when the card reader failed or the cooler fogged and howled. Things act up sometimes. The town was a place where systems went wrong on their own schedule, and people learned to stand still long enough to wait. When she stood at her sink and rinsed a plate, she told herself the third stair was damp that day, or the grain had raised, or a maintenance man had fixed something that made it feel off. The words helped until the next time she missed her count and felt the cold cloth of a life not yet lived pass over her skin. A letter came from her sister far away, paper thin and covered in a hand that had learned to hurry. The envelope smelled like the house they had once shared when the window by the table never shut properly and the curtains fluttered without wind. Her sister wrote about a job she was thinking of, and a man she was not thinking of, and a dog she had been walking for a neighbor during the day. Reva held the letter over the sink and read, and then laid it flat on the counter where her mug usually sat. When she came back later, a damp oval marred the corner of the page as if someone had breathed on it. She ran her finger over the spot. It dried and left a faint, dark halo. She didn't mention any of it to Lynn. They sat in the laundry room while the washers thumped, and the floor shook and swapped the kind of talk people share when boredom forces them to practice being human. The posted advisory had added a line about keeping stairwells clear at all times, which made everyone look guiltily at their baskets and then shrug. The kid with the skateboard had left a brochure for some youth thing on the corkboard and drawn a smiley in the corner of it. Reva watched the dryer window fog and clear and fog again and thought of the rippled glass in the other door. Late that month, if a month can be said to have shape, the building's heater stopped with a tired clunk, and the manager came up the stairs with a box of space heaters and a line about temporary hardship. The tenants took them like loaned pets and put them near the places their toes could not get warm. The compressor in the laundromat downstairs started to click and kept clicking until even people who slept through their own wakes at last called to complain. The building had entered one of its spells, and the town's power had flickered in sympathy. Advisories went out that said to limit use and to expect rolling outages. People carried candles around the way people in other towns carry their keys. In that dim, the stairwell found a new depth. Shadows pooled in the corners, and the wall by the landing looked like it had exhaled a long-held breath. The third stair darkened further. Reva climbed with her phone's flashlight cupped in her palm like a firefly. The beam flinched off the rail and caught the dent where someone had knocked it with a moving box long ago. She told herself to breathe normally. She could not hear herself over the sound of the building breathing back. She started to test the third stair on purpose. She would place the ball of her foot on it and press, then lift, then press again. Nothing. She would step quickly and give it her weight without warning. Sometimes the air changed. Sometimes it did not. Once, when she came home late from a shift, made worse by a fight in the back near the cardboard baler, she stepped without thinking and found herself again at the other door. It looked cleaner than it should have, as if someone polished their life more often than she ever had. The key slid. She put her face close to the glass ripples and saw a blurred version of her own room. She heard her voice in there, say a word she had not chosen yet. She backed away without opening. The word drifted through the glass, soft, like someone calling a dog in for the night. She slept badly after that. In the mornings, she woke with a taste of lint in her mouth. Her dreams had turned practical. Stairs, hallways, doors. Small problem after small problem. Every solution fit for a moment, and then would not hold. She went to work and stood behind her register and felt. Her body performed the labor of someone who wanted money, and the mere fact of it made her feel like a trick. She let it have her. At the store, a man with a red hat complained about the beeps and told her the new machines were too loud, even though they were older than she was. She nodded and apologized and made the sound in her throat that soothed strangers. Her manager asked if she could cover another shift to make up for someone else, and she heard herself say yes by reflex and wondered, as the word left her, whether she had agreed to something else as well. The word yes had started to feel the way the third stair felt underfoot. Something tilted in it. On a day with sun like a sheet hung to dry, the father on the landing above hers knocked on her door. He stood with his daughter behind his leg, little eyes peering around. He asked whether she had seen a cat. It had gotten out. He had propped the door open with a shoe while he carried in groceries, and the animal had slipped by like a thought. Reva shook her head and said she would keep an eye out. The girl asked whether the building was allowed to have animals. The father said hush. Reva crouched and asked whether the cat had a name. The girl whispered a name that tasted like sugar when you said it. Reva promised to call if she saw it. She found the cat 2 nights later, or it found her. It waited on the dark stair, tail curled around its feet, looking at the landing as if it knew a door should be there. It made no move when she approached. It did not blink. It had the kind of fur that tells you a creature will become someone if it gets enough to eat. Reva reached down slowly and put her hand under its belly. It let her lift it. It was lighter than it looked. It made a sound in its chest like paper sliding out of an envelope. When she carried it up, it turned its head toward the wall where the laughs lived and opened its mouth like it meant to answer. The father came to the door with thanks and a small donut from the pack he had bought, and the kind of relief that makes a person's shoulders drop. The girl brushed her cheek against the cat's head and closed her eyes like prayer. Reva accepted the donut as if she was hungry and said good night. In the hall, she paused by the dark stair with the cat hair still warm on her sleeve. She placed her foot and stepped. The rail felt like a live wire. The landing ahead held no door, but she understood the way a landowner must understand that a river had once cut a different path through their field. The next morning, someone had written on a strip of paper and stuck it where the yellow notice had once hung. Mind your step. The letters were careful, printed by a hand that wanted to be legible. People laughed and then did as they were told, whether they admitted it or not. The county sent a new advisory about keeping stairwells clear and avoiding gatherings in the halls due to noise complaints. The manager posted it and then stood under it with her arms crossed, as if daring people to disagree with the paper she had taped up. A man from the end unit came down and asked, in a tone that made the whole thing a joke, whether the advisories included laughter. She said maybe. He snorted. He had a laugh like a pan on a burner. On a night with rain-like pins, Reva missed her count again. It was not a miscount so much as a forgetting of how to count. Her feet kept moving. She stepped, and the air folded. The landing bent wrong, and then bent back. The door with the rippled window stood a hand's breadth from her face. A key she did not own bit her palm from inside her pocket. She reached out and placed her knuckles against the glass as if to knock, and waited for the shape of herself inside to look up. The room beyond had her lamp and her coat and her mug. It had a plant she had thought about buying, and then had not bought. The coat hung with its sleeve turned. She saw herself in there, or a person who wore her shape. The figure stood with a dish towel in hand and laughed at something in the air. The laugh had her timing, but not her tone. The tone sounded like someone repeating a joke they had made the day before and getting it right on the second try. Reva lowered her hand. She stepped back, then forward, then to the side. The doorway wavered the way heat wavers above a grill. She thought if she stayed too long, the walls would adjust to hold her, and the floor would learn her weight so well it could take it without asking. She took one step toward the steps, and the railing met her palm cleanly, metal with a little rust. She climbed to her own door and unlocked it and turned on her lamp and stood a long time watching her shade hold the light. She half expected the other Reva to knock, to show up with the towel in hand and ask for sugar or a story. No one knocked. She went to the sink and rinsed a plate and set it upside down and listened for a breath at her neck that did not come. She lay on the couch and counted backward from a high number and let herself fall asleep somewhere in the middle. After that, the building learned a new sound. Every time someone moved past the landing on their way up or down, a small chuckle washed out of the wall. It was not loud. It did not require a smile in reply. It had a timbre of settling wood. People made jokes about having an audience. A man said the building enjoyed their company more than their rent. A woman said she had always known the place had opinions. A kid banged a skateboard against the rail and complained that the laugh made his skin itch. The manager asked people to mind their decibel levels and posted another notice. The tape held for a day and then fell with a soft flit to the floor, and no one picked it up. Reva started to picture the hallway between her door and the stairwell as a kind of bridge over water. She walked across it carefully, feeling the give in the middle, the way old wood flexes and then forgives. She held her keys tight so they wouldn't announce her nerves. She told herself there was nothing there that wasn't always there. She tried not to listen for the timing of her steps against that thin little laugh. One early morning, just before her body accepted that this was the hour for sleep, her phone buzzed with a message from a friend she had not heard from in years. The friend wrote in the old voice, the one from the town they weren't supposed to mention anymore. Heard you in that building with the stairs. Small world. Reva stared at the screen and felt her face go warm. She wrote back a line that could be read as a joke, then another that could be read as not a joke at all. The friend sent a time-stamped photo of a stairwell that could have been hers, except the rail was a darker paint. The friend wrote that every building had its one step. You could spend a life learning which it was. Then nothing. The screen went dark. The room went quiet, except for the radiator's attempt to be useful. When the next outage hit, the stairwell went black for a while. People dug in drawers for flashlights and used their phones like candles and pretended not to feel how much they needed the light to show them where the world had left off and where it tried to start again. The third stair was just a darker dark in the dark. Reva set her foot and felt the air cool and the floor teach her the boundaries of her body, like a patient mother taking a child's hand and placing it where it cannot be hurt. A door sighed shut on a landing that should not exist. Down in the lobby, the mail slots gave a small metallic murmur as the building breathed. After the light returned, a boy went missing for an afternoon. He turned up on the roof by the outlets for the vents, sitting cross-legged and tracing his finger around a rusted bolt. The manager brought him down and handed him to a mother who cried without scolding. The boy said he had heard a joke in the stairwell and followed it. No one asked where the joke led. People do not invite stories that might change the shape of places they need to believe in. Snow came early and then left. Reva worked and slept and stood still. She took the long way around the landing whenever she could, crossing behind the laundry and up the service stairs that smelled like old soap and something that had lived in the wall and died. That avoidance felt like a lie she could live with. Sometimes the service stairs were roped off for maintenance, which meant a bucket and a sign and no one around. Those days, she made herself take the main steps like a person who trusted the world in general, and not just in parts. Her appetite thinned. She kept water in a pitcher and watched the way the surface trembled when the heater tried. She boiled noodles and ate them standing up. She stopped leaving dishes to air dry because a damp oval always marred the same corner of the same plate, and the oval looked like a lip. She started drying by hand and stacking quickly. At work, the beeps were too crisp and cut into her head. She wore earplugs and said she had a cold, The building inspectors returned in warmer clothes and used a new device that blinked green. They wrote fewer numbers and reassured no one. They asked the manager whether there had been reports of structural oddities. The manager said she preferred not to use that word. The inspectors left a form that asked for signatures. People signed. The form went into a drawer with a knee-high stack of other forms and a packet of ketchup that had fossilized. The tenants made plans for spring. A small notice in the mailroom announced a potluck on the back patch behind the building if the ground dried. A woman with a firm voice wanted to start a garden in a container where a child could see something grow, even if they didn't know its name. The father on the landing signed his name to bring lemonade. Lynn wrote paper plates and underlined it twice. Reva signed up to bring a pan of something she would decide later. She wrote in a quick hand that made promises without making promises. On the night before the potluck, Reva stood at her sink with dough under her nails, and the oven heating the room to a bearable mood. The laugh in the wall went off and on, as if a person at a party had a story they were worried wouldn't land and were practicing the end. She wiped her hands and went to the stairwell and stood on the landing and placed her bare palm on the wall. The plaster was warmer than the air. Someone climbed below and stepped wide a beat late, then corrected, and the soft chuckle met the motion. The laugh timed with the pause. Reva felt a matching little lift in her chest, an involuntary yes. She should have gone back in. She didn't. She placed her foot on the third stair and kept it there, weight forward enough to feel the floor learner. The light over the landing hummed. The smells that lived in the building mop water, fried food, hot dust gathered in her nose. Her hand left a print on the wall you could only see from a certain angle. She closed her eyes and waited for the other door to show, and for her other life to drift up like a face behind glass. It did not appear. Instead, the stair under her foot tilted gently, the way a plane shifts when the pilot touches the controls for reasons that will not be explained. She opened her eyes and saw a hand on the rail in the corner of her vision. The hand was hers and not hers. The wrist came from a sleeve she did not own. The fingers tapped the rail twice, the way she tapped it when she had to go to work. She heard her voice 2 breaths away say a word that could have been any word used at the end of a day. She pulled her foot back, and the stair gave her weight up, as if returning a borrowed thing. She was back in the same landing, the same light, the same wall laugh, the smell of her oven warming into readiness. She went in and shut the door, and leaned against it and stood there until the oven beeped. The sound was chirpy and absurd and fixed nothing. The next day, at the potluck, the building wore a mood like the day after a funeral. People brought bowls covered in foil and set them on a folding table that tilted on a crack in the concrete. A child ran shoeless and did not step on shards. The lemonade tasted like water with an idea. The girl with the backpack had a white ribbon in her hair that made her look like she might be going to a recital, even though there was none. Reva tried a scoop of this and a spoon of that, and nodded when someone complimented her pan, though she had only brought something anyone could have made. Someone asked if the stairwell had always done that thing. The joke started and stopped around the table. People talked around it the way a stream talks around a rock it cannot move. A man said the laugh started the winter before. A woman said she remembered it from way back, and people had forgotten, because that is what people do when a story gets tired of itself. A kid said he liked it. Another kid covered his ears. The manager stood by the back door with her arms folded and watched the sky like it might fall. Later, in the laundry room, someone had written on the corkboard in a small, careful print, "If you hear your name, do not answer." Someone else had crossed out, "not," and added a maybe. Someone else had drawn a stair with an arrow pointing to a notch, like a map carved in a tree. The machine kicked against its bolts, and the floor trembled, and still the felt-tip ink on the paper did not blur. Reva started to carry the other key with her on purpose. She did not know how she had first ended up with it in her pocket. It felt like the life the third stair offered had included a key for her, and even though she refused the door, she took the key as if it belonged to her for reasons the other version of her would understand. She kept it in a small pocket and rubbed it with her thumb like a worry stone. It had a smooth cut. It fit no lock in this world other than the one she would not turn. She told herself she respected the divide. A place asks for some things and not others. The building had asked for a pause, for a step taken carefully, for a silence where the laugh came through. It had not asked her to leave who she was on the landing. If she crossed over, she had the sense she would continue, but also that she would learn something about herself that would not let her come back. Not because of a rule, but because of the shape of a person who can walk through a door like that and call the place they land home. A week with heat like a hand on the back of your neck pressed down on the town. The building sighed a lot those days. The pipes whispered. The stairwell smelled like plywood. Reva put a fan in her window and watched it pull the curtain in and let it fall. She could hear laughter through the wall at odd hours, soft and warm, like the recording of a laugh, not the thing itself. She went to work and rang up cold drinks for people who said they didn't know if they were coming or going. She came home and stood in the stairwell and breathed. She kept her hands off the rail more than she once had, because the rail had begun to feel like someone else's hand. She dreamed she climbed a stairway that stayed the same while she changed, a little each landing a shift too small to see, until she stood in a mirror and found that her face belonged to a person who would not have laughed at the old jokes. She woke and drank water and sat on her couch with her feet on the table like someone who paid her own rent and could make her own small messes without a witness. Fall snuck in with an edge. The county posted a notice about a mold check in older buildings and asked tenants to bag soft goods in closets. People did this and then left the bags piled in their rooms like new furniture. The stairwell filled with the smell of vinegar, then bleach, then nothing. A man with a device walked up to the third stair, put a hand on his knee, and without looking, set his foot wide. Reva watched him from the mail slots and thought about buying a roll of yellow paper and writing her own notice, strong letters, a loop on the first letter, and then taping it up with clean new tape so the wall could have a rule again, even if no one followed it. She didn't. She had learned a little about the way rules provoke, and the way warnings attract, and the way a door called. Forbiddance will teach you a love of the word, yes, no one can undo. On a night with a hard wind, Reva came up the stairs with groceries and a bottle of cleaner balanced against her hip. She fixed her eyes on the wall so she wouldn't watch her feet. A neighbor below her shouted a friendly thing about staying safe in the weather, and her mouth shaped the word "you too" without sound. She set her foot on the third stair and felt a cool slip over her teeth, the sensation of a first inhale into a dark room. The bottle under her arm pressed harder. Her hand tightened. She went forward, not up. The door with the rippled glass sat before her in a way that gave her no choice but to see it. She shifted the grocery bag to her other hand. The key in her pocket warmed against her thigh. The hallway held no voices. The laugh in the wall, timed to someone else's careful climb, had quieted like an audience taking its breath in. She lifted the key. It felt right in the way a tool feels right when you've been using the wrong one for years. She held it close to the lock and paused. Through the glass, a coat on a hook, sleeve turned. A lamp warming a corner. A mug upside down. Drip paused on its lip, and her voice. Not the tone she knew, but a tone she recognized as one a person could grow into if they made small good choices for a long time. The voice said a word she had never let herself have. It was a word used by people who sleep without arguing with themselves. An easy small word. The sound of it came late, like always, but it landed with a certainty that made her chest ache. She fit the key into the lock. It turned with a soft internal click, a sound that had a long memory of her hand. She turned the knob and pressed the door in an inch, then two. A draft came across her face like warm bread. From the kitchen, the other her laughed at a half-remembered joke. She listened for how far the laughter went into the body that made it. She listened like someone might listen for a leak behind a wall. She could step through and leave the stairwell behind and get used to the idea that every choice she made had always been waiting for her to be bold enough to walk into it. She did not step through. Her hand stayed on the knob long enough to feel the skin of it take the shape of her palm. She closed the door gently. The lock caught with a small, proud sound. She leaned her forehead against the glass for a moment, the ripple cool on her skin. Then she turned and climbed the stairs to her own door, the rail under her hand behaving like a rail. She went in and let the room meet her, with the lamp not yet lit. She folded laundry and put a pan on the stove and went to rinse a cup and stopped. A damp oval sat on the counter where her sister's letter had once lain. It had dried into the paper of a menu she kept to cover a stain, a faint dark ring edged like a print. She watched it until she knew she was looking at it too long. She washed the cup and set it upside down and went to the couch. Her key, the other key, she set on the table. It looked smaller than before, not because it was less, but because it had returned to being a tool and stopped being a promise. After that, the laugh in the wall grew scarce. People said the building had decided to mind its business. The manager stopped posting notices and took down the old ones and sanded the tape residue until the wall showed raw spots of pale. The third stair still waited darker than its sisters. People still stepped wide out of habit. Now and then someone missed and came back pale, with keys singing, and said nothing. A door would shut softly where no door had been. But the episodes had thinned like a fever breaking. The building settled into winter with the humble plot of making warmth and holding up the roof when the wind tried to pry it off. Reva lived on. She worked nights and slept oddly and carried her life in a way that made it look lighter than it was. She learned the names of the new kids and the sound of the father's laugh when he finally learned one of the jokes the girl told. She helped Lynn move a couch that had been left on the curb by someone who did not care enough to drag it far. She took the long way some days, and sometimes she stepped wide, and sometimes she put her foot deliberately on the dark stair and counted the beat between her breath and the small chuckle that still came from somewhere deep in the wall. On a late afternoon, when the sun found the stairwell and made a bar of light on the third step, she stood and looked down at it for longer than made sense. The bar of light made the wood look warmer. A moth sat there like a letter someone forgot to send. She placed her shoe beside it, and the moth lifted and lofted up, slow, like a piece of ash. She smiled, and the smile felt like work. She went up to her door and tried the handle twice, and then again, not because she doubted the lock, but because repetition made a rhythm, and rhythm felt like prayer. Sometimes, in the right quiet, she heard faint chuckles through the landing wall, light as settling wood. They came timed to the tread of feet climbing carefully, one step too far. She knew those feet. She knew that careful. She did not press her ear to the wall to hear more. She let the sound pass through her like a small weather and went on about her night. In bed, if that was the name for a couch that had learned her shape, she lay and breathed in and out. Her window made a small glass whine in wind. Somewhere a neighbor washed dishes and set them upside down to dry. Somewhere a door shut softly where no door had been, then opened again, as if someone on the other side had forgotten something they did not want to live without. Reva's hand found the groove in her table where a fork had nicked the wood long ago. She set her thumb there and held on to a small true thing until sleep arrived, not as a door to be passed through, but as a step down into a room that was already hers.